trying to survive in environments that are not only like slowly killing us in certain ways, but in systems that are not for us. So we're struggling mentally, we're struggling socially, we're struggling biologically, we're struggling spiritually. It's crazy. Hi guys, welcome to another video on May in Bloom. I hope you go well. I hope you've been blooming wherever you've been planted or where you've been transplanted, which I think is more aligned with the subject that we're going to talk about and explore today. For those of you who are new here, my name is May and I talk about all things holistic decolonial living and healing. I also facilitate sessions on exactly that, so if you're ever curious about that or you're on your own journey and you'd like somebody to guide you through it or at least share the space with you while you go through it, please don't hesitate to check out my website, Bloom Baby Bloom, and you can read a bit more about my sessions, some reviews, and the different kinds of sessions I give. Today's subject, I think I've been like sprinkling things here and there. I wanted to make a video dedicated on a further encouragement of exploring some of the things for you specifically. One of the things I really value is sovereignty and living a very self-empowered life by yourself, but also in community. And one of those things is the way we share knowledge. I've learned a lot from other people who shared online. I exist today, and I always say, because of the things that people were willing to share online about their own journeys, their own struggles, their own healing, and what have you. And I try to add to that human archive, especially as I've gone through the years and I've collected my own kind of like buckets of information and trying to really relate them to my specific existence. I'm a big believer in understanding your context in life and understanding your well-being and trying to create an environment and a way of living that actually helps you thrive better wherever you're planted or wherever you're transplanted. I am originally from Uganda and I grew up partially part of my childhood in Africa, the rest of my life in Northern Europe. So there's a lot of things that I've learned over the years about my well-being and how much it has to be tailored to the kind of person I am, to my biology, to my heritage, to my DNA, and all of that. All of those things obviously matter. I remember when I lived in Copenhagen, there is this park that is almost like half zoo, half park, and I used to live close to it, so I used to walk around. You need to calm down. There's like this cute dog that just follows me everywhere. I used to do my walks and my little running and joggings there. And I gave up going to zoos a long time ago, like once I understood like how we get our food and the things we do to animals and what have you. Like that's a whole other subject. Like I never wanted to go to zoos again. But this park was like, as I say, like it was half zoo, half, so you could see a part of the zoo, but then you'd have to have a whole different entrance to like explore the bigger part of the zoo. The part of the zoo that was visible was where the elephants were. If you don't know, I love elephants. I even have, oh, actually, that's so funny. It was not intentional, but I even have my elephant ring. You can't see it, but it's one of my favorite rings. So I love elephants, and I would pass by and see these elephants, and I passed that by during the different seasons of the year. So I'd also pass by them during winter, and they would still be there. And my heart broke for them every time I saw them during winter. And there is a privilege in getting to see them, but also a guilt in knowing they're not supposed to be there. And nothing made it clearer than when winter came along. The empathy I had for them, I also recognized was a form of also mirror for me, in the sense that I'm also not supposed to be here in this cold. It's also an example I use a lot when it comes to our diet and how to incorporate more aligned ways of eating, especially from a holistic decolonial perspective, that you want to research what kind of foods your ancestors ate before colonization, before heavy European influence, especially if you're not European, because chances are you are eating in a way that is more detrimental to your well-being. But the same also goes in the kind of environments different people thrived in. Now, thrive is the key word here. Our society in so many ways is based on us just surviving, and that's kind of the status quo, and it's even maybe preferred by a system that wants you overspend, exhausted, and just on the bare line of barely making it in so many ways. As you can tell, I have a lot of faith in our systems. But basically, when you think about thriving, which for me is a goal, like especially somebody who's trying to realign myself from a place of also healing generational pain and trauma and what have you, like a part of that is also recognizing that I want to move my ancestry into a space of thriving and not just surviving. And also with an understanding of the context we live in, with an understanding of the limitations we might have, or the limitations we still feel impacted by in our daily life and what have you. But weather is a big thing. To be honest, there were always signs, but it hasn't screamed as much as when I started, like late 20s, late 30s. I've always been in pursuit of the sun. Ever since we moved to the north, I've been in pursuit of the sun. We moved to the north to have a better life, and in many ways our life did become better. We had a lot of access to things that maybe we would not have had before, but there's a price to pay. With any decision in that regard, there's a price to pay. The price sometimes we don't even know. Like sometimes it's like, yeah, growing up in a place where you don't have a lot of extended family, therefore you don't have a lot of social support network. But there's also the other stuff that we don't think about a lot, like the impact on us psychologically, not only because maybe you feel more isolated or you feel like you don't belong as much, but also what it can impact you just for the fact that you're not having access to the food that your system grew up thriving on, or not even having access to the weather or the environment. That because when we live in a place, it's not just a place. You know, and I think like when we live in very urban areas, we forget this part, but we are part of our environment. We're one with it, especially from a holistic perspective. Like you want to understand that humans are not separate from nature, but they're an integral part of it. We are too part of nature. I read actually an article on this in Substack, but more from maybe decolonizing our idea of what it means to be human. Your environment obviously matters. Just like when I saw those elephants in the zoo during winter in the cold, I'm like, they're not supposed to be living in a climate like this. They're supposed to be like frolicking on with a big tribe, having lots of space. The zoos are also very small, so they can't roam the way they were supposed to be roaming. We can see it when it happens to animals, at least some of us can understand that, and then we don't see it when we do it to ourselves or we are put in those situations. I think, as I say, like it's only when I've grown older I've seen more and more of the consequences. And if you followed my journey online, you've also seen my pursuit of escaping the cold in so many ways. Like I've shared before on this channel, I've taken every opportunity I ever got to go study abroad, and any privilege I got in maybe getting grants to study abroad. And whenever I wanted to study abroad, I went south. I've also lived in Brazil with my previous partner, and that was also another dream come true. And I've always seen that whenever I lived in somewhere that was warmer, I've lived in Portugal, I've lived in Spain, I felt better. Like I could handle life much better. And it's a no shit Sherlock situation because you're somewhere where the environment is created for you to thrive better. Even though like it's still in Europe, like when I was in Portugal, when I was in Spain, but it's totally different, you know, than Europe, like where we have such limited access to sunshine. By noticing how I could feel when I lived in these much warmer places, when I lived in Brazil, when I lived in Portugal, when I lived in Barcelona, and being able to be in places where I had more access to sunshine, and traveling in a caravan over the last few months and getting also to live in warmer climates, and also realizing how much better I felt, how much more grounded I felt, how much fulfilled I felt. It can also be, of course, a combination of everything, like living in a life that is a bit less stressful, kind of having more say in how my days, my months are arranged. That also, of course, makes a difference. And I think we should all be entitled to it if that's truly what you want, because I'm mostly growing up to realize that obviously it's not everybody's dream to live that way. But living in alignment with yourself, whether it's like lifestyle wise, like how you want to live, but also from a biological perspective, physiological perspective, like when you are as a woman and you recognize I should be living according to the cycles of my female body rather than the cycle which are more geared towards men. All of these things matter, and all of these things are actions that you can take for your own holistic empowerment and also holistic decolonization, by recognizing that there's certain ways of living that are seen as the norm or not a big deal because they work for a certain group of people, but they're not going to necessarily work for you, and in fact they might be detrimental to your well-being. So when it comes to health, I have over the years struggle with a lot of different things that then I later recognize this is all connected to one really big thing. It's wild because it feels so simple and it feels so sad to think like we take it so much for granted. If you follow a lot the beauty community and the way they talk about the sun, the way they talk about hiding from the sun, protecting yourself, there is this narrative, even when we talk about global warming, which I'm also like pro-environment in the sense of course we need to care for Mother Nature, and I try to do that in many different ways that I live my life, the way I eat, the way I shop, the way, but there's also this villainization of the sun, and this idea that we need to stay away, especially from an aesthetic, a beauty aesthetic perspective, which is also quite ironic because especially as Black people with black skin, stay away from the sun because it also adds too much hyperpigmentation. This is something that I also have to a certain degree, but the funny thing is, whenever I'm in very sunny spaces where my whole body gets more tanned, everything looks more even. But if you live in the north, you're trying to actually work against what your skin would naturally do in a sunny environment, your natural environment, and you're trying to lighten the hyperpigmentation. Instead of when I'm in warmer climates and I can get a tan, of course with caution, I'm not out there like baking, but like I get to a place where my skin clears up, where everything looks unified, where I look like I would have looked if I stayed my ass in Africa. When it comes from a health perspective, because that's just aesthetic, the villainization of our connection to the sun is also the villainization of our connection to nature in a certain way. For the majority of things that live on this planet, they are sustained, they are energized by the sun, they work in connection with the sun. The sun is a huge power system for many living beings on Earth, but somehow because of our way of seeing the world, and especially the very Eurocentric worldview, the sun then is also demonized in a certain way, like our exposure and our time in it. A lot of us are very indoor people. The more civilized your society is, the more time you're going to spend away from the elements and more indoors. This is detrimental to everybody, regardless of race, but specifically for people of color, because already if you're living in the north, you're most likely going to be getting less sun than you would in many parts of Africa, if that's where you originally come from or your ancestors come from. And then on top of that, to add the fact that you're going to be doing most things indoors, like living indoors, maybe because the weather's not nice outside, working indoors, it's alienating you from energy forces that are supposed to sustain you and help you thrive in the world. I feel then in that regard, we are no different than the poor elephants I saw in the zoo, in this small space, knowing fully well, because when I was young, I used to love Animal Planet. I used to watch that shit in the Nature Channel. And I learned a lot about different animals, and knowing that elephants are supposed to roam like on such vast plains of Earth, and to see them in such a small place in a weird environment, probably not even eating the food they were meant to be eaten, maybe a substitute of that. But what zoos do that we don't even do for ourselves is a zoo would try at least to mimic some of the things, the environment of the animal, or give it as close to possible the diet it always has eaten. Then I'm gonna be like, okay, now you're in Scandinavia, so you're gonna eat maybe what our cows or whatever have you, like what our natural animals here eat. They try to research that to a degree that they can feed the animal in a way, or exercise the animal in a way that is best, but it's never ever ever going to be as good as them being out and free, obviously. Now, as you know, because I also talk a lot about sovereignty, like this is something that's very important to me. Like we are also domesticated in a way. We also play a big role in domesticating ourselves, and therefore also adding to our own detriment and our own health declining in different ways. People migrate for many reasons, and a lot of it is for a better life. And that, of course, lives in a bigger context of colonialism, of capitalism, neocolonialism, the way we've set up the world where one part is an extractor of wealth and hoards it, and the other part is suffering from the consequences from that extraction, distraction, or even destabilization that is needed from Western countries or more powerful countries to sustain cheap labor, cheap resources, but also even power on a geopolitical perspective. There's a lot of reasons that people move, that people seek a better life, and the worst part, having to seek it sometimes in the same place that causes the harm of the places you come from. So in that part, I don't judge us as humans. Like, we do what we need to do to at least have a chance at a better life. But sometimes what is portrayed as a better life is not really a better life if you really like scrutinize it to its core, and scrutinize even who told you what a better life should look like, right? So there's many ways that I've been living, trying to create my way of existing, but also not just mentally and identity-wise, but putting myself in a space that offers me more ability to thrive as the kind of person I am. And what that also has made me think a lot about, like when it comes to my health and the lack of D vitamin. And like I said, like having experience when I did live more in warmer climate, how my skin cleared up, how my depression subsided, how my energy levels increased. Also, you're going to have access maybe to more vegetables and fruits that are directly getting all the source, all the vitamins from the sun, and you're eating them. They don't have to travel as far because they grow in that climate. There's a lot of things holistically that then align for you to live a much more healthier life. But we were like in the south of France during summer. You get a lot of sunshine in the south of France too, even though it's still like Western Europe in some way, but it's still in balance. Usually my favorite is like all the way south, particularly like Portugal. Like that's where I feel like this is the closest I can get to African climate in Europe. So there's all these things that you could notice, that even though I was in a moment where I wasn't sleeping as much, I still felt like very energized. I felt like very clear in mind. I felt like there's a lot of things that, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm getting so much D vitamin. Obviously my skin cleared up. Now it's winter, like a lot of it has washed off, but like my skin evened up as well because it had like a uniformed appearance, and also like the food I was eating obviously was bathed in lots of sunshine. At one point, I think I've shared about this before, we were doing workaway with a couple that had its permaculture farming practices and grew a lot of tomatoes, all varieties, beautiful tomatoes, bathed in the sun all day long, that we would just freshly pick and then cut up and add to our salads, our meals, eating that, like being in nature, working with the soil, not spending as much time as I used to when I was in Northern Europe, or even when I had other corporate jobs, indoors, but living more outside with the elements. You feel different. You are living more aligned with how we were meant to live. Like forget even just being black, how we were meant to live. Your energy is also much more well sustained. Your energy is improved. At least for me, that's the experience I had. And when I started reflecting on all the diseases that kind of started like accumulating over the years, I see that a lot of them have D vitamin as the common denominator. I remember having issues with my teeth when I was 18, and it was like periodontitis, a gum disease. I later recognized that that was also related to a lack of D vitamin and K2 vitamin. So it took me a while to understand what was happening, and once I got that also on rack, because I wasn't supplementing the way I was supposed to. We didn't grow up having to take vitamins because my mom didn't grow up having to take vitamins growing up in Uganda, having like a tropical climate, having access to so much good tropical fruits and vegetables and what have you. So she kind of like wasn't prepared to how you should live if you no longer live in that area. Like we adapted to so many things, even our diet in certain ways. But the fact that I wasn't getting the D vitamin that I was used to as a child obviously started like deteriorating the health and constitution of my body, like, and rapidly. So then I started noticing on top of that, that's also when my depressions got really out of whack. My mental health was really declining, also D vitamin related. And then like then I started taking supplements, and especially if I take D vitamin with K2 and vitamin C, I noticed that went away. Like my winter depression, which I just thought I was just sad all the time. Sometimes even forget winter, because in Denmark we wouldn't have like proper summers. So it's not like I would have like proper 6 months of happiness, and then no, because even in summer you're not guaranteed full exposure to the sun, and then living mostly indoors, like going to school or going to work, that also means like you're not getting a lot of sunshine unless it's like early morning or later in the day. But anyway, so there was a lot of things that were happening that I noticed were related to my D vitamin or my deficiency with D vitamin. And then because of that, because it's also helps with regulating of hormones like D vitamin, then I got a lot of hormonal issues that affected my hormonal acne, that affected later on, like I learned that I had like really small but still like fibers, and I'm like, oh my god, this has been affecting my periods. Everything was connected, like And I was like, all these issues are because I live in an environment that is not created for someone like me who needs a lot of exposure to the sun. And also I live a lifestyle. Maybe if I stayed in Denmark, but I spend a lot of time outside, maybe I would have thrived better, but it also impacts the way the food I need to eat, the food I thrive on. When I started like being more mindful of that and changing and putting myself in environments, because I had practiced unknowingly, like what happens when, because I didn't think, I wasn't raised to think it mattered. I just thought like, oh, if it's cold, you wear warm clothes. If it's sunny, we are happy that it's sunny. But if we're in Italy, we eat like Italians. If we're in Denmark, we eat like the Danes. We still, of course, kept some of our traditional food from my mom, which I'm really grateful for. But obviously, as you go out, like I went to boarding school for a majority of my education, and that was particularly like Western, like Danish food in some way, but it was vegetarian. There were so many things now that I look back, I'm like, I'm lucky that these are the worst things that happen, because a lot of people go several generations, maybe even not taking that seriously. Like a lot of our doctors now are learning, in Denmark at least, to advise people of color to take D vitamin and throughout the year, not just in the winter season, because of how it impacts them. But of course, there's nothing that can fully cover what you get from actually being exposed to real sunshine, being able to work with the soil, being able, like, even if it's your own little garden or balcony, being able to spend like a good amount of time outside rather than inside and sitting. There's so many things that we take for granted because we're so disconnected. The Western way of living, which is the blueprint that is kind of imposed on a lot of people in lots of parts of the world because of imperialism and globalization, of imperialistic and Eurocentric values and ideas on ways of organizing societies, a way of defining development. So there's a lot of ways that we take on of living and we think it's progressive. Even in Uganda, for example, like you notice that more and more people who adopt the more Western way of living because of progress, like Western diets, their health now is not as good as people who are maybe like stuck in the village and having to grow their own food. And I'm so blessed that like I get to see the advantage and disadvantage of both worlds. And I get to actually see why the things matter and how valuable they are, because I get to be removed from it, and then I see how I feel when I'm connected to things that maybe people, my ancestors who grew up in the village to a certain degree, took for granted, that you could eat mostly organic food that was cheap and fueled by the sun and nourished the earth, and healthy soil, because we haven't over chemicalized most of our soil, thank God, because of lack of development, you know. So there's all of these things that we take for granted, but they help and aid us in living more abundant, more healthy lives. What my project now in life has been the last few years is literally trying to find my happy spot, my happy medium of both. Because also I can't go back to Uganda because of the way I am. My country is very homophobic. I think if it hadn't been, I would have considered it, but I can't in good consciousness for my family, myself, go back to Uganda. But I am seeking the most tropical substitute in that regard. And also my partner is French, and is a French artist and sound therapist, but a lot of the stuff she does requires her to be around here in Europe. And I'm like, yeah, I can work anywhere, I can do the things I want to do anyway, so I'm more flexible, but at least we need to get closer to the sun somewhere. So that has been our adventure so far, and I shared a bit of it about our travels and even our adventures going through traveling this way. But the biggest adventure is creating a way of living for myself that is more aligned. But yeah, basically that's what I wanted to share with you guys, especially if you're a Black woman living in the North or diaspora in a climate that is not of your people, but maybe because of circumstances you needed to pursue, or your parents brought you here. I don't know. All I want to say is that these things matter. Like your environment matters, your biology matters, your ancestry matters, the way you eat, like even in the food we eat. Like I recently took a big break from gluten, but there's a lot of things I've removed from my diet. I eat mostly a plant-based vegan diet, and for holistic reasons, like ethically, consciously, spiritually, politically. There's a lot of reasons why I choose to eat the way I do, but also for health, obviously. And I think also it's quite aligned with my people. My DNA was built in a space where there was an abundance of whole, natural, plant-based foods. We had, of course, animal protein here and there, but the majority of our diet was on those things. So I'm my system is good enough at digesting those things. And so far I haven't seen any issues relating to that. But environmentally, like changing my environment, I've seen like how much better I can feel, how much more energy I can have, how much more I can thrive when I'm actually replanting myself in an environment and in soil that is created to help someone like me thrive. And I think it's even wilder because we're trying to survive in environments that are not only like slowly killing us in certain ways, but in systems that are not for us. So we're struggling mentally, we're struggling socially, we're struggling biologically, we're struggling spiritually. It's crazy how we survive all of that, and that's literally all most of us are doing. I will not take it away from some people are thriving, but the majority of us are just surviving. Whenever I talk to African people in the diaspora living in Europe, like there is this sense of, I remember like me and my friends when we got to a place, we're like, what's your escape plan? Like, you may be gonna study here, you may be here with your parents, you wanna make your money, and then you're gonna leave it. And I've seen also a lot of my friends move and make plans to move somewhere warmer, with other opportunities for them. So, and some people even returning back to their home countries. Now, your solution might be different, but just to say like, it matters where you live. You are a being who's affected by the conditions you live in. You are a being also that's not like the elephant in that zoo in Copenhagen in the big city, but you are a person who has agency to some degree. And if you can just do a few things, even like spending more time outside when it's summer. Like I remember when it would be winter and I was working still indoors during the pandemic specifically, I would always have my lunch outside because it was 1 hour lunch. So I would use that time to go outside and get a lot of sunshine, because I knew that even though I was living somewhere warmer, working from 8 until 5 or what have you, and then you gotta go maybe prepare dinner, what have you, then you didn't spend a lot of time outside either. So I had to make sure that during lunch I was outside and I would eat outside or get access to sunshine. But now that I plan more of my days and I go for walks, and I'm making that more of a part of my life because I need that. It's not just it's not just for vibes. Like, I mean, it affects your vibration literally, but it's a necessity. You need sunshine. You need like an animal, like a plant. Like when we see what our plants need, like I'm a plant mama and I love my plants and I want them to thrive. They have different needs and you have to take care of them differently, and you have to respect their constitution if you want them to thrive and the environments they need to thrive. It's a pity that we don't feel that we can do that for ourselves, or that there's so many limitations that hinder us in doing that for ourselves. So this video is just a reminder of that. Wherever you are, wherever you come from, whether you are from South Asia, whether you are from the Arctic, whether you are, if you're in an environment that doesn't feel authentic to what you were created to thrive in, find ways, even if you stay in the same environment, to honor that constitution to a certain degree. Like I'm very much in practicing holistic medicine and wellness, but I do believe in going to doctors just sometimes to figure out what's wrong. And then what are my options? And then I go home and figure some shit out if I want to do it my way or if I want them to follow their advice. I take that very seriously because I know, like in a lot of Western medicine, they don't see the body holistically. They don't see the person holistically. So there's a lot of blind spots, and you as a person have to be your best advocate, and you have to empower yourself with knowledge, and not only knowledge, but put things into practice, even if it's just to try out and see how you feel. Like for me, letting go of gluten, because gluten and bread, these are not big things of our diets. I got really into it and I loved it, especially after giving up dairy. And I love dairy, I love cheese, I loved all of that. It's very addictive. Just to say, by recognizing that I shouldn't even having this much in my diet. My ancestors didn't grow up on that. And I'm not saying I'm eating a diet that's completely like my ancestors, but I'm applying the principles of the core of their diets. And I'm seeing that that actually helps me thrive more. I mean, all of us would live better with less processed foods. That's a fact. Like none of us are supposed to be thriving on processed foods. Unless it's something, I don't know. I'm always open to that one exception or people, what have you. But we can all thrive on the diets that our ancestors, from a natural perspective, like with my friends who have Inuit heritage, like for them their diet looks different and totally different from mine because they grew up in cold climates where they needed to eat a lot of protein from animals, and usually they would eat the entire animal and they would get all the vitamins and what have you from the animals because they eat not just one specific thing but everything. So that's how they'd get all their vitamins met. So that diet might look very different than somebody who grew up in a tropical place. Like, your context and your individuality matters, and the more you understand it, the more you understand yourself, the more you understand your heritage, the more you can ground yourself to work with yourself, with who you are, with your strength, with your weaknesses. It's the best way you can show up, so that you're not just surviving, but you can actually get a chance to thrive as a being. Anyway, guys, I really hope that that is of benefit to you guys. All of these things I mentioned, like I say, like I've been working on them differently, especially like with my womb healing. I feel like that's the season of my life, and I feel like my hormones have balanced out a bit better. Like I can see that there's progress there, and I continue to do work in that direction because I understand it a bit better now than I did before. Like, knowledge is power. So get educated, but you can't even find the knowledge if people think in a worldview that couldn't even imagine that those things happen, because the worldview tells you that humans are above nature and they have no connection to nature, and they can just be placed A to B and C and it have no consequences on their health, which is not true. Thank you so much for spending time with me in this video. I hope it's of benefits. I hope it gets you curious about different ways that you could change the way you live, or the way you organize your day, if that's all you can do, or the way you eat, so that you could thrive more and not just survive. And I also love to read your comments on this subject, especially if you're also in the pursuit of your Goldilocks area, like the perfect place for you, that is respectful for you as a being, whether it's just the environment, location you live, even the way you work, the way you make a living, whatever it may be, that is more respectful to your constitution as a being. As I said, I hope this is of benefit, and that you live a very thrive-oriented life this year. I wish you all the best, courage, light, and lots of love. And I will see you in my next video. Bye, guys.